Your narrator is going to try to talk about something that the synchronicities on the way in here to the room indicated I might be onto something, but it's an attempt to be of service without the prompt. Um, so I can like connect a few things. Like when okay, part of what's alarming to someone who's like my age and about the everyone's my age and people younger that are being like sort of would be and why I'm concerned about what's going on like the universities and why people like me part of if you don't know part of like what's like being called by the universities like being called like there are a bunch of things being called being like a dangerous right wing nut or something. Part of it has to do with being concerned about what's happening to certain kinds of young people at the universities, but like perceiving it differently, like this Lawton tragedy. But here's the thing, like, let's see, put this together correctly. Like, the issue, like when I say like, okay, this guy coming on the campuses, like who's like basically was started as like a comedian basically, but and he's saying all that, talking about 17 answer to 1984, 1776. He's got slogans. He's like he basically hangs out with comedians and isn't a serious person. But the issue is like, for why is that passing for like like as though that's like revolutionary or something? Well, because one of the things is like the topics that are actually of concern to like people who are really like thoughtful and like know of our like country's history and like know what's like taking place now. The topics themselves, although there's a wonderful documentary about about the Wizard of Oz being the book by Alfred Baum being a monetary metaphor. It goes back. It also like Nell Carter's book. Standing in Armageddon, which talked about like the sort of Grover Cleveland era and the free silver movement, and that documentary talks about like the that we need to return to the idea of a national bank and to the greenback return to like there used to be a greenback party and Abraham Lincoln's was one of the well-known great president who supported a debt-free currency alongside the dollar. That people who are like concerned about those things, that's also part of like what we said before about like how Chomsky says like the principal enemy of our country has like sort of always been Britain, including in the fact that they backed the slavehold. Like they were the ones who like backed the South would never have attempted to secede like from the Union unless they were backed by the British, like who wanted to keep our country like a slave plantation with like and not have slavery end and things like that. Like there's a lot of history into all that. That they didn't want us to industrialize or like be a sovereign economic power, and that's sort of happening again, except with this network of we sort of lost what we call like monetary sovereignty. But that any young person who gets interested in it, or anyone who's an adult or an older person like my age who's interested in it, and then particularly people who are interested in it who like live in rural communities like interested in these kind of issues of the way in which we lost our economic sovereignty and what that means. That's why our economy is in the state it's in. It's why we don't have national health care, all this stuff, like because we're under threat of capital flight from like the British banks and whatnot. Like those topics are what the people who control the universities and teach there and everyone goes there considers to be dangerous. Like you're a dangerous person or what's called a right wing nut if you're concerned about those things. And I say, well, what's that about? And one of the things it's about is like from my experience, the type of people that are in our universities and behind this whole like liberal education thing, they have much of the same attitude that I joked about, like the British, like a lot of British people have towards the country in general, like they don't like Americans, like think Americans are stupid and uncivilized. Like, well, that is sort of how the typical like college, professor, like liberal college professor at the university, like likes to tell the students that like all the, people want college educated is stupid, and like people who, like sit around like passing themselves off as some kind of left wing people when really they're into this liberalism thing. Like, right, I mean, that is just the place where they would like, someone who was like, well, what about the currency? Like, what about economic sovereignty? And like call security offices. Like, yeah, we've got one of those nationalists in our like class. He's a danger. Like, he has to see the psychiatrist. he may be a racist. Like, that's who's controlling the universities, and that's the topic that you can't mention. Any group that like is talking about those kind of things like economic sovereignty and everything, something's like poisoned. I don't know if the universities know they're a part of this, they're doing that, like to demonize people who are concerned about that. That really is the issue, and about like the British being sort of the principal economic, the enemy of our country economically. But also that if you read that book, The Anglo-American Establishment, that too you considered what a lot of people call people in the LaRouche movement right-wing nuts, even though he founded the Labour Party. I'm not really putting this together right, but like I hope this to be like the sort of rehearsal to put it together right to be of service.